One of the biggest cultural stories for the city of Port Moody in 2023 was the decommissioning of the McKnight Trench, located at the Port Moody Station Museum. First opened in 2014, the McKnight Trench has served as an educational tool, a place of remembrance, and a reminder of the price that was paid by those who served their country in World War I. Dateline, June 29, 2014. Volunteers at the Port Moody Station Museum construct a World War I-style trench in honor of Lieutenant Wilberforce McKnight, one of 10 Port Moody residents to have given up their lives in the Great War.
Then in 1915, my country said, son, it's time to stop rambling, there's work to be done. So they gave me a tin hat and gave me a gun, and they sent me away to the war.
McKnight was an engineer, so that we and took that as the engineers were the ones that were designing and the trenches and building the trenches. So we honored McKnight by naming it after him.
As president of the organization, I had the honor of being here when we actually officially opened the trench. We had dignitaries here from many of the countries that were involved in the First World War, dignitaries from our own political offices, including our federal, provincial, and local delegates. And it was an opportunity for us to basically really showcase, what had been created by this group of volunteers who had come and built this wonderful exhibit to honor the event of the First World War.
The day went very well and the ceremony was great. Lots of help from a lot of people. And the trench itself was the result of 4 days of hard work by half a dozen people. So a lot of digging, a lot of sandbags.
Guy Black brought me into the project in June of 2014. And that was the very first trench that we had, and it was a small one that was out here. He was involved with it with his sons, myself, and Marcus actually heard about it and came in on the project about a week after we first started. We spent, as a publicity, we spent 3 days and 2 nights in the trench over the July long weekend. And that had to be one of the longest, hottest weekends I've ever spent in uniform in a long time.
Along with the success of the original trench project came the inevitable plans for expansion.
As it started to gel and people started to get more engaged with this community-led project, it then became really important for the museum to really understand the purpose of what the trench was going to represent. Of course, we were coming up to the anniversary of the 100th anniversary of the beginning of the First World War. And so as the community interest started to grow, then that's when the museum said, well, maybe there has to be something more done. And the community volunteers that were engaged at the time said, well, we need to do something more than just a minor little event.
When we first went back and looked at the ground, we took everything down as much as possible. We got lucky. We had a contingent of cadets that came in later on that helped us out. Man, were they enthusiastic, yeah. As we went by, we researched, thanks to John Goheen, who had sketched a trench over in Europe.
I was contacted in 2015 as the idea for a project to create a trench at the Port Moody Museum. I've been working for years as a battlefield tour guide and historical work. And so my role initially was to work on the design and trying to ensure that the aspects of the trench were realistic and as true to 1914-18 as we could make it. It was a project, though, that developed along the way. The project to build the trench was certainly the beginning, but it developed into so much more. And That's where my interest really started to catch, was what we could do with this trench. There was lots of enthusiasm, but the challenge was to harness that enthusiasm and make sure that it was manifesting in realistic displays for the public. The trench itself, I think, became a focal point, and really organically developed in that we certainly had the public coming to visit. We had certain highlight days along the way. So we had an event around the Somme in 1916 that CBC in Newfoundland were even talking about, and people in Newfoundland were phoning their relatives living out here to come see this trench. And so things like that that drew the public were quite rewarding. But I think the most impactful aspect was the education program for school-age students, and that really took off. We had students coming here from not just the Tri-Cities, but from around the metro area and beyond. Programs for the students were designed to meet students where they're at, so we had everything from sort of kindergarten age right through high school. Some high schools in particular, Burnaby North was one that really embraced the trench, visited many times, and actually used it to develop a short feature that was presented on CBC across the country, and the trench was a focal point. So I think from my perspective, seeing how a program that was initially to build a trench and to create some awareness developed into something that was sustainable for a very long time and engaged students in very meaningful ways. As a program, it was hard work, a lot of time, a lot of effort, sweat, equity, but it was well worth it.
The contribution the McKnight Trench made to the community did not go unnoticed, with the Trench Squad receiving a Spike Award from the City of Port Moody in 2015.
It was amazing. Rather than what I knew is like digging a foxhole and getting all muddy and being cold and horrible, we sort of kind of dug a place I felt into the community. And that's when it got really interesting for me, that suddenly it wasn't just about like, digging, getting dirty, and maybe me remembering the good old days in the army or something, but it was about like leaving a mark in the community. And then when it really came home, when the first kids arrived from schools, and we gave talks to them, and yeah, it kind of choked me up, like you teach these young kids about our history, about this very crucial moment in Canadian history when the nation was formed, and then you see in their eyes and you talk about them, and I think, wow, this is beautiful, and we created this in our community, and I'm so thankful for obviously the Trench Squad that helped, and everyone who comes by and just shakes our hand, and people are just great, and that makes me go on digging in the dirt. And thank you so much.
Welcome to the Port Moody Wilberforce McKnight Trench. My name is Marcus, and with me is Ashley, dressed as a nurse, and Simon, dressed as a private. I'm dressed as an officer, and behind us is the opening to the trench. We had over the years many reenactment events. The way it sets out, we sort of script a little story based, of course, on historical events, Vimy Ridge or the raid at the sugar factory. Now, of course, we don't have that many people performing, but so we try to sort of pick out certain key features. Then we go down into the trench. We're all dressed up in uniform. We sort of reenacted some of those historic pictures. They're difficult sometimes because none of us are actors. So what we learned, it's kind of difficult sometimes to just be in character the whole time. But it's great, and it tells you so much about the history. We're here now at our SE-5A replica biplane. It's one of the newest addition to the museum, and now it's of course a couple of years old. But it's a great starter for our trench tours. It starts sort of, we're talking about how initially some of the politicians thought, and one direct quote, the aircraft are the devil's tools and they will never be used. And then ends up with being, a lot of the aces are actually Canadian born that are flying, and aircraft become towards the end of the war a really important factor, and it's great because it shows you a lot, or helps us to teach about, you know, the air war during World War I, but also the relevance of new technologies that have been introduced.
I'd been working with Deborah Needham, who was a local resident, and Deborah had wanted to offer something to Port Moody that would be meaningful. And this SE-5 First World War replica plane came up at an auction, and unfortunately we only had a very short window of time. She got on the phone real fast and ended up being purchased at auction and donated to the museum. As the trench got built out, it became a part of that exhibit and was actually just outside the trench, and I think it added quite a bit to it. It gave it a little bit more First World War feeling with the barbed wire around it and everything else.
Despite the expansion and the addition of the replica biplane, the McKnight Trench's days were numbered. Having served the community for over 8 years, more than twice the duration of World War I itself, the time finally came at the end of 2022 to close down the exhibit.
Only in the last year we went through the decommissioning process, and I was honored to be called back to basically be the master of ceremonies for that particular activity, because it sort of, for me, connected the line from where we started to where we ultimately completed, and were able to put in place that significant history event for this museum and for the community.
This evening, we will hold our last candlelight vigil in the trench. It will also be our opportunity to pay tribute to the McKnight Centennial Trench legacy, as we will officially close the exhibit following the candlelight vigil. World War I and the wars and peacekeeping initiatives since 1914, where Canada has been engaged, are in themselves tragic human events. The dedication, hardship, and sacrifice in those events left many scars, but also showed the strength and resilience of Canada's military. The McKnight Centennial Trench has provided a significant remembrance of the earliest mark of this strength and resilience.
As the president at the end of the trench project, it was, I'll say, awkward. It was awkward because I knew how successful it had been, but I also was aware that it was coming to the end of its life cycle. And we kept it going for probably a few more years than it was originally planned for, and it got to the stage where it became unsafe. The experience that we are talking about of young men in many ways believing they were going to go on this life-learning experience overseas for a very short period of time, serving their country, serving the Commonwealth of the day, and then the reality of what actually transpired, that understanding was being lost. And one of the values that the trench really has given to those people that have been here is at least a linkage to, even though it's a recognition or a rebuilding of an environment that was there, but a recognition of this is what our forefathers went through. And so many of these would have been their grandfathers or their great-grandfathers that would have been in the war. Some of them may have returned, many of them probably didn't. And so this was a way in which generations of today were able to sort of say, there's a connection there, and I didn't really appreciate how dramatic it had been. One of the things with respect to the trench that was really important to me personally is my father served in the First World War. He was with the British service at the time. So when the trench project started to gel, even for me personally, I had not sort of recognized what had been the reality of time back in 1914. And so to me it was emotional in many ways, and I can say that at different events, be it the opening event or the closing event that I was able to and be very pleased to have emceed, there were tears in my eyes. Because I could think back to what it would have been like for my father and his generation to have gone through that, not only in living through that period, but actually having been in those particular wartime experiences in France. Although they say the numbers are greater in the Second World War, the First World War was that war that really created a Canadian identity. And so we really want to understand that, you know, although it was a traumatic period in time, there was an identity of Canada that was built then that even today we kind of live by and are recognized by around the world in what we were able to accomplish at that time.
I'm very proud, and I'm sure that my predecessors, Robert Simons and Dave Ritchie, who had been the presidents prior to me, were very, very proud of their work and the work of their boards and all the volunteers that stepped forward. And I think too the feedback that they got, you know, how could you not be proud? It's really telling people what it was like, and so I'm happy to have been a small part of it, and a very small part compared to all the work that have been done by other people.
Probably the biggest takeaway from the trench project, I think, is the people that I met along the way. There were some tremendous people that worked on this. Some of these guys were just so fantastic in their knowledge and their enthusiasm and their attitudes that they're just great people to know.
Over there, send the word over there.
All right, at ease points, at ease points, at ease points. You need a light there? No. There you are.
For more information on the McKnight Trench, go to www.pomo.museum under the Past Exhibits banner.